Afternoon, everyone. My name is Diego Portillo Mazal. I'm the director of the Inner City Capital Connections program, and welcome to our educational breakout on becoming a made-in business. We were just actually talking in this room a little bit ago about the drive to shop local, but we've also heard a lot of conversations about moving your business online and having people shop throughout the country, and some emphasis on actually putting a very local brand on your business, either on your business or as a program that is spawned by the city or sponsored by the city or an organization. So today's conversation will be free-flowing about how to join one of these programs if they exist, how to leverage the local identity of your business. I have conversations about businesses you might not particularly expect to be aligned with that brand. So we are lucky to have a business owner and an organization from Hawaii who can talk about having tech businesses in Hawaii and how to leverage local branding for something like that.
Great. Well, thank you, Diego.
Yep, I'm just going to turn it over to Meli James to moderate the panel. Thanks, Meli.
All right. Thanks, Diego. And we're excited. We have two Hawaii entities on this panel. I think it's perfect timing for December 1st panel, whenever where else in the world is getting cold. But we'll try to not make anyone jealous here. I'll promise to keep it the orange background here and not show you the blue skies around my window. But thank you for joining us for our Made in Business, How to Become One. We're really excited to have all of our panelists here and all of you joining us. I'd like to encourage everyone to please start asking questions and sprinkling them in. We won't wait till the end. So if you have a question, just shoot it over and we'll try to get through as many as we can. But again, I'm Meli James. I am the co-founder of Mana Up. We are an economic development initiative based here in Hawaii, helping to grow the local product industry here in the islands. We run an accelerator program that's 6 months, where we bring in 10 companies. They have to be elevating the brand of Hawaii. They have to be headquartered here, as that's a very important piece around building jobs, sustainable livelihood, and opportunity here in the islands, as well as be at a certain revenue minimum and wanting to scale and good for e-commerce. So those are some key components to our organization. We also have a store here where we have an actual physical location as well as an e-commerce presence, and really around narrative and helping to expand that and really helping the companies that are actually based here kind of take back that narrative of the way the world learns about Hawaii, as we have a lot of entities that aren't based here in Hawaii that leverage the brand. So I'm sure we'll jump into more of those things later. I wanted to introduce myself. I'm a little bit of a panelist, but I'm also our moderator today. So I'm excited to have our panelists also introduce themselves. So why don't we start off with Katy?
Thanks, Meli. Hey, everyone. My name is Katy Stanton. I'm the Program and Operations Director for the Urban Manufacturing Alliance. UMA is a national coalition of what we call manufacturing practitioners. So these are folks who are supporting making and manufacturing businesses of all sizes. They're folks in economic development agencies, workforce nonprofits, lending institutions like community development financial institutions or banks. We have mission-driven real estate developers. We have a lot of people who traditionally associate themselves with manufacturing, but then we also welcome a lot of people who don't. So we try to sort of make the reason to retailers and affordable housing developers and faith-based organizations that they too are connected to manufacturing, because manufacturing is really all about lifting up communities. We believe that manufacturing is a wealth building strategy, either through production jobs or management, of course, ownership, and then entrepreneurship, which I think is really at the heart of today's conversation. One of our major areas of focus is actually local branding initiatives or made in brands. So Portland Made is with us today. You'll hear from Meghan soon, but then we have dozens of these across the country, and they're really a form of economic development, a strategy to help local makers and manufacturers access the kinds of ecosystem services that they need to build and grow their businesses. So that's UMA in a quick nutshell, and I look forward to the discussion. Thanks for having me.
Great, thanks, Katy. I'm excited to hear more from you. We need to talk more. All right, great. Let's have Torie go next. I think she's based in DC.
Hi guys, my name is Torie Partridge. I run a company called Cherry Blossom Creative, and our product is a series of illustrated maps featuring over 50 different neighborhoods in Washington, DC. So we're very focused on like local community made in business, but we've started to expand to making illustrated maps of neighborhoods in other cities as well. I've been doing this for about 8 years. We have a small storefront in Washington, DC, where we sell not only the maps, but also loads of really fun creative goods and tools, as well as other local brands. We're a participant in the Washington, DC's Made in DC program, and we do a lot of business with the Shop Made in DC stores. And I'm really excited to hop on here today and talk to you guys a little bit about how we've leveraged being a locally focused business with a locally focused product who's also starting to expand outside as well.
Awesome, thanks, Torie. All right, let's have Meghan go next.
Hi, everybody. My name is Meghan Sinnott. I'm the Executive Director of Portland Made. Portland Made is in Portland, Oregon. We support local makers in the Portland metro area. It's a membership organization. At its core, we are a community and a support network. We host educational events for local makers, as well as networking events. And we do online promotions via our website, social media. And right now we're working on a series of pop-ups in the city, and it's been an absolute delight. Our members vary. It can be ceramics and eyeglasses and table makers and kombucha makers. Basically, if you are making in Portland, we would love to have you as a part of our network.
Thanks, Meghan. And last but not least, Jalene from NoHo Home.
Aloha mai kako. I am Jalene Kanani. I am the founder of NoHo Home. NoHo Home is a Hawaiian-inspired luxury home decor company. We like to call it style with aloha. We manufacture luxury duvets, comforters, kitchen textiles, and we tell the unique and authentic stories of Hawaii. We are owned and operated Native Hawaiian, and we really exist to elevate the design and that Hawaii puts forth. And we really would like to bring that to the global community and really tell our stories.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Jalene. So, you know, this panel is around made in, and I know we all kind of have different definitions of what that means and why it's important. So I'd love to have Katy start off with perhaps, you know, more around the organization and where were there gaps, or, you know, why did the organization start, and where are you seeing the greatest impact, and what does made in mean for you folks?
Yeah, great question. I think the first thing that made-ins mean to people is that it's just a way to connect, right? Like you see the words made in Portland or made in Hawaii, and you're like, I get that. That makes sense. And it's sort of a way to get people in the door, both consumers, but then also businesses. So in the context of the Urban Manufacturing Alliance, a made-in brand is what Meghan's doing. She is aggregating resources. She is creating a network. She is building an ecosystem where businesses and consumers can plug in and really understand what is made locally, but also actually make things locally. And so we always call like the logo that's often associated with like a made-in brand, the tip of the iceberg. And what's underneath the iceberg is all of the services that they provide. And I think what's really unique about the made-in organizations that are in our network, so this is Made in NYC, SF Made, Portland Made, Made in DC, Made in Baltimore, there's a lot. They all look really different. They can be housed within a university. They can be their own standalone for-profit like Meghan. They can be a nonprofit. They can be housed within a city government. And that's really showing the flexibility of this as an economic development strategy. So where are the gaps in your community? Who's ready to step up to the plate to support these made in brands, to support makers, to support manufacturers? And then the entities exist to find those gaps. So the services that SF Made offers are completely different than the services that Seattle Made offers, for example. And so SF Made is different than Seattle Made. So it's really responding in real time to what the businesses in the communities need. So that's sort of like our angle, our definition of what a made in brand is.
Yeah, no, I like that. I know for us, you know, we don't require that everything's made in Hawaii, as we have a lot of challenges and limitations around manufacturing and sourcing and things like that. So the example I always give is like the rubber slipper. You know, it's kind of invented in Hawaii, but we don't have rubber trees and we don't have like rubber manufacturing. So we essentially wouldn't be able to make that slippers, which is why we kind of, for our initiative, didn't require that, although 60% of our companies are making their product in the state. But they are all headquartered here. So I was curious to hear how you slice and dice that, because it is different for everyone, like what's important, where are the gaps. But Meghan, I'd love to hear from you from a Portland Made standpoint, how you folks approach this and what has Made in mean for you.
So as a membership organization, anybody really could become a member of Portland Made. So we do have people who provide services in town, etc., and a few companies that aren't making in Portland but are headquartered here. And then we just make a promise then that, you know, we will support them as a small business owner, but that we won't represent them as Made in Portland on our website. Yeah, so we support people anywhere in the Portland metro area. And there are a few companies, you know, especially now with an extra, you know, nod towards diversity, equity, and inclusion, is a lot of consideration around, you know, is it viable for a company to exist and be 100% made in Portland? For example, like a printing company. So people who are printing on t-shirts, that's been a big discussion with Portland Made, is to figure out, you know, if a shirt is technically made elsewhere in the United States, but printed, the value add happening in Portland, Oregon, do we accept that brand? And we do, because there simply aren't t-shirt makers in Portland, Oregon yet, on a larger scale. You know, we'll see, but yeah, so it's an ever evolving definition of what makes a brand made in a place, but largely it's also around values. So a lot of Portland Made companies, you know, sustainability is number one, and finding ways to support makers in their quest to make a product that is sustainable, quality, and further representing the great Pacific Northwest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like what you said there around, well, one, taking an assessment of who your stakeholders are and where you can lean. You know, there's a lot of great cities in the US that have major corporate headquarters that are helping to underwrite certain initiatives that are beyond just government. We actually don't have any major headquarters here. So it was, when we started off, it was like, you know, who are the players and where are the gaps? But I also really like what you said around, what are your regional strengths? What are the areas you can be leveraging? So for example, with Portland, having that more sustainability, and that's important, and it's kind of, it comes alongside that idea of Portland and Oregon, that you could be leveraging, like what are those thematics from a product standpoint that could give it that greater competitive advantage being from there. We're very similar and more like the ocean and a lot of our Hawaiian culture. Jalene, I know you're a great example, and would love to hear from you around kind of your journey in starting NoHo Home, and why was, you know, leveraging or elevating the brand of Hawaii and more place-based be a big part of like how you got started.
Absolutely. Thank you. So my background was FF&E, sales, and design. And so I would work with architects, interior designers, and large end users like the hotels and the military to source products. And what I realized was that there were no designs that spoke to our history or culture, our unique flora, fauna, and there was an appetite for it, but it just didn't occur because the designers were in the Northeast or they were overseas. So it was just really hard. And so that's basically how I started. I started doing customs to tell these stories, to create narratives so that the buildings themselves could tell a story and they could speak about our history and our culture. So it really was kind of purpose driven. It wasn't like I had some kind of an affinity for a particular product and then I wanted to figure out how to market it. I had an affinity for my culture and then I figured out what I could make to tell the story of it. And so that's basically how I came to doing NoHo Home. So I pivoted and decided that I always say I did it for the aunties, because my aunties would ask me, can I have a pillow for my house or a rug? And I'd say, oh, well, you have to buy 500 of them, or each one's going to, be $5,000. And so I opened up NoHo Home, and we were expected to be solely direct to consumer. I really wanted to be in that space. I wanted really unique relationships. We wanted to leverage technology. However, retail got a hold of us and were really interested. The appetite was there from a retailer perspective to now get into these niche spaces because they're looking for authentic stories as the dynamics around retail is changing. So because of the outreach, we actually started to do a lot of wholesale. Actually, in May of this year, we were supposed to spend a month in Herald Square, Macy's, as a Macy's workshop participant, and so that's postponed. But we are going live with Macy's across the United States via their online platform, and so I'll just share that the opportunity to share culture through whatever vehicle possible was really what brought this company to light, versus a product and how am I going to market it.
Yeah, I love your story when you were getting started and you asked for more Hawaiian prints. They would send her pink flamingos, like super Miami, and she knew there was a problem.
Oh yeah, we'd get boxwood roses and fleur-de-lis, and we'd get great things that were designed for other locales. And we think that there's a certain sophistication to what we would like to see out there. So we're actually really excited, and timing was good.
Awesome. All right, thanks, Jalene. Torie, would love to hear from you similarly, your journey and how place-based has, something that was very important to you as you got started.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually didn't start my company as a product-based business. We started as a design studio, working almost exclusively with small local DC brands. And it was my neighborhood maps came out of a client project where they asked for a mural that had been, was sort of representative of a neighborhood in DC that, people really loved. And we did this very colorful, beautiful neighborhood mural for them. And so many people asked us, hey, can you make a print of that? I want that on my wall. And so we did, and they sold like crazy. I'd never even thought about doing a product-based business. I'd always thought about doing sort of service-based, design for clients, work for hire. And the project has basically spun out of control since then. I've done neighborhood after neighborhood after neighborhood. And as we're going on almost 10 years of doing this, I was thinking about the fact that DC was a very different city when I moved to it, 10, 15 years ago. And especially in the past 10 to 15 years, I'd say we've gone through a real local renaissance in Washington, DC. DC was sort of known as this city that was very transient culture. People came here for a little while, but didn't tend to stay. The focus was heavily on sort of government, defense, contracting, lobbyists, all of these things that you don't think of the creative culture of DC when you look at DC as a city. And so being able to create this product that not only was something that was very distinctly, like it's colorful, it is beautiful, but it also focuses on neighborhood culture. More and more neighborhood people are moving to DC and actually wanting to stay there, not being there for a couple years, putting in a couple, you know, like a couple years that they're firm and then like going somewhere else. People are starting to really, really love being in this city and being part of this like flourishing arts culture and creative culture here. And so we ended up having a product that really hit on that, on people who wanted to celebrate local culture, who wanted to celebrate local makers, and who wanted to really show off their neighborhoods, show off where they lived. So we've now been doing that, and I moved exclusively to being a product-based business about 3 years ago when it became clear that the neighborhood maps were so well loved and becoming so much more prolific that we were able to basically say that we didn't really need to take on clients anymore, because so many different retailers were interested in picking up the maps and the cards, and so many customers were coming up to us and trying to buy them, and the collection got big enough that we were really representing a big swath of the city and starting to represent other cities where people were really interested in their neighborhood culture there as well.
Great, thanks, Torie. I love what you're talking about around that kind of pivoting, when you didn't start off as being more place-based like Jalene did. But you know, I'd love to.
Before we move on, I
Yes.
think there's a couple questions.
Oh, okay.
One from Memphis and one from Boston about service as opposed to products. I think it's easier to identify this made in with a product versus one is an educational services company and one is a services company in Memphis. How do you address that in the services industry?
Great. I'd love if any of our panelists would like to take on that first question. I know for us here in Hawaii, in terms of service, it's also kind of really pulling from culture, customer service, and different ways like that. So, you know, how do you approach education or kind of a service-based industry that can lean on what is important to a place from a, you know, a service standpoint, or what are you known for? I mean, that's not really our area. We're very product focused, but I do know from a lot of the companies we work with, it comes from, you know, what are the values of Hawaii and how do you integrate?
I think kind of to the point of the universities that are that associate themselves with place, and the way that they promote and market themselves as being like this community of intellectual property that somehow is better or has some unique DNA in promoting that intellectual property. So what is that culture around the community that could then be leveraged you know, globally? So I mean, Boston is, you know, very you know, the community of universities in that area, I mean, it is probably like no other, you know, to that point, to be able to leverage that culture that already exists. You don't have to do anything to it except, you know, market and advertise about the community and the culture and how you leverage that as a company. So what is it that you do special? What is your special DNA because you happen to be here? What are you bringing to the global community from Boston?
So I guess, Katy, I'd ask this question of you, like each city has their own kind of attributes, and how are you leveraging them? I know that came up earlier in our discussion around, you know, with Oregon, there's sustainability, there's green, all these other great things. For Hawaii, of course, we've got all the Hawaii things, including Mai Tais. But, you know, what are you seeing that our people are leveraging those types of thematics in addition, of course, to the actual place? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the brands that the local brands or the made-in organizations that we work with have sort of identified, maybe they started, I should say, out of what has traditionally been made there, and then, or like a legacy or anchor manufacturing or business, and that sort of like has spawned all these other like related businesses, right? So it might grow out of something that's already there, or maybe a feeling or something like a something that evokes something out of their history, is something like I've seen a lot of businesses sort of start on. And I think just to go back to the question about the service organizations, like I think the thing with like a made in and the words made in is just so directly tied to like physical making and production that like I was trying to think of it through that lens and it just wasn't connecting. But when I took a step back and said, okay, like what is it that that maidens do? It's about connection and it's about bringing people together and providing services that don't already exist. And so like if you remove the word maiden and you just think of it like, to use the other buzzword of 2020, ecosystems, right? If you think about it as building ecosystems and building ways for people to connect and learn from one another and support one another, then I think you could take the production like version of a maiden and apply it to like a marketing firm or a services organization. And I think like Torie is a great example, sort of the opposite, right? But Torie, you were like a design studio, you said, who was, I am assuming, like working with clients like you did with the original map and sort of figuring out ways to support local businesses that way. And you ended up pivoting towards, you know, a version of manufacturing, but like you were working with those clients. So I'd actually turn the question to you too, is like, is like what I'm saying resonating, or do you have another thought?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're 100% right. I think that ultimately working one-on-one with people and working closely with people and working closely with local brands, the fact that we were a local company that was interconnected in the community, that like knew potentially about great other business partners or other manufacturing partners or other like local resources, made us a better design studio. And I think ultimately now it makes us a better product-based business and a better person to be interacting with other types of businesses. I think that cities are this like beautiful ecosystem of like all these different entrepreneurs like working with each other. At least that is the way that our community is in DC. And I think that no matter whether you're in service or whether you're in product, like being able to leverage your community and being able to like, you know, be part of that is going to make your business stronger and more resilient.
You know, just to top that off, because there's another question there, similar service business in Memphis. You know, one thing that we do that's very kind of tangible in this, in creating that, you know, made in or, you know, in the spirit of, is our service. So when we give service kind of with our culture. So whenever possible, we try to use our Olala Hawaii or Hawaiian language, even in our communication. So if someone sends us a Instagram, you know, little text or an email, we'll typically answer with aloha, and we will throw in different words. You know, we'll use mahalo, we'll use you know, colors like ula ula or polu, you know, just to kind of add the flavor and also share knowledge in that sense, normalize our language. But to that point, the person in Memphis, you know, you want to answer your emails with maybe, okay, this is gonna, I mean, like a y'all, I don't know, but what is that 901 movement? What is that about? And you as a native 901 area code, like what was it when you grew up that was so special? That makes you are made there. So you are the product. Forget your service, forget the product. You are the product. You were made there. Tell your story through your service.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, great question. And Diego, please feel free to interrupt if questions come in, because we've got some great chat going on, and so I'm trying to manage it.
Yeah, I think that, well, first, I think to Jalene's point, somebody mentioned that in using language from the place might be difficult with a Boston accent, or dangerous with a Boston accent. But but other than that, I think there was a question here about how do you promote the image of made in a place like Philadelphia, where businesses around you are closing left and right at this particular moment, and also, does a made in brand limit you in some way to that local place or with international customers?
No, that's a great question. You know, I guess kind of looking at all of our panelists, really, have there been pitfalls around being so closely aligned with a made in a particular place? And where have been some of those challenges for you? Torie, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was going to hop in on that one. I think I have sort of the double whammy of being not only a product that it's a made-in product, but also a product that is specific to a particular location. So you're not going to buy a DuPont Circle DC neighborhood map if you live in South End, Boston, you know? So I think that as with most things that are, you know, negatives also have their strengths, and things that are strengths also have their downsides. We've been able to have this like very deep, very specific connection with people on a local level. And that probably has hampered us from becoming more of a national brand. This was something that I thought about a year ago when I realized, you know, there's probably a moment where I'm maxing out my customer base in Washington, DC. You know, at some point, you know, everybody's going to have this, and you know, we're not going to need to do this anymore. And I had this kind of conversation with myself about, okay, like if we're doing this, like how do we become more of a national brand? And it just means expanding, but expanding means, you know, more time making connections. It means we started going to larger wholesale shows and trade shows to be able to promote the products more locally or more nationally. And one of the things that we started doing was working specifically with retailers in other cities. So we started working with retailers in places like Madison, Wisconsin, or Santa Barbara, California, and actually making maps for them so that we already had a retail partner there, and we weren't just sort of blasting out advertising to the entire city. So I think that it's been a challenge for us to sort of push past being a specifically DC local thing, while still maintaining our like core brand identity as a company that is like focused on Washington, DC, and exclusively kind of doing all of that. It's been, you know, goods and bads, challenges and rewards.
Yeah, I really like that. Two things you're saying is, one, aligning yourself with people with built-in audiences that can then create that entree into new areas, so you're not starting from scratch every time. But also the whole concept of like product development. So how do you continue to evolve and create relevancy when everyone's got the poster now what, right? So what is that? What is that process of evolving your products or expanding your products to continue to scale?
Meli, can I add one thing?
Yeah.
I feel like I have such a niche focus on making and manufacturing, but again, when I zoom out and I think about like what makes someone care about a locally made product, it's the story of the people behind it. And so to the question from the person from Philadelphia, like I think it's less about like it was made in Philadelphia and I'm only going to sell to Philadelphians, to like Torie's point there. It's like, here's my story, let my story sort of be the inspiration factor for having a wider network. And I think ultimately that's what a made in brand does, is it helps sort of tell that story collectively. But I think if you can really find ways to share that in your own way, because if you don't have a local brand initiative or a made in organization near you to sort of support that, I think that is sort of a piece of the puzzle at least.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's interesting when you kind of start thinking about micro brands too. We were just doing some research on McKinsey around millennials are 4 times more likely to buy from a micro brand than a legacy brand. And that wasn't always the case. You know, you think about 10 years ago, everyone was kind of the trusted brand or, you know, this or that. And you also think about what, to your point, Katy, around narrative, you know, people are looking on the shelf and in moments and seconds, they can get on your Instagram, they can get on your Facebook, they can get on your website, they can know what do you stand for, who you are, what's your mission, what's your story, how'd you make this? All those things are at everyone's fingertips, which, you know, that all changed in 2007 when the iPhone kind of launched. And now, of course, we have many different phones, but it's literally at your fingertips. And so how do we leverage that? How do we tell that story Where to your point earlier on the on the question in Philly is, how do you tell that story succinctly and in an interesting way that can be digestible by people that can really get behind it? So it's not necessarily just about that place, it's about who you are, and all that. So Jalene, I'd love to have you chime in too, because I know you've got a lot of thoughts around this.
Oh yeah, lots. Well, to the original point about having relevance outside of your community. So when I was doing a licensing collection for a international commercial textile company, that's exactly what they wanted to figure out. You know, why would people outside of Hawaii be interested in the designs? And it was really about the stories. That's what it ended up being. It was going to trade shows in Las Vegas or New York and telling the stories, and they loved it. And to the point, I think that Meli might have just made, I always like, so for example, what I'm wearing, I don't have a story behind it. I bought it online because it was pretty. Is it of Hawaiian? Was the inspiration Hawaiian? Was it Native American? Was it African? I don't know. Now, if I were wearing one of my my fellow cohort members, Kahulalea, if I was wearing a piece from Kahulalea, like Meli is, I could tell you that on my blouse is the Ohia Lehua. It is from the region of Hilo up in the volcano area. It only grows in arid areas. It's thought to be very sacred, and I could tell you a story about it, and I would know it. Even if I didn't tell you the story, I would be proud of the pieces of it, and there would be a story behind it. And so to that point, I think anybody might be interested in the story. That's why we watch entertainment. That's why we, you know, we love Anthony Bourdain, because he went all over the world and he shared stories. So really, don't be limited by thinking that it is just a geographical interest. Your stories can be leveraged globally.
Thanks, Jalene.
Megan, I think this one would be particularly interesting for you. Elena asks, how do you become standout in a made in when the entire industry is essentially made in, like wine in Oregon?
So as in, like, if you are just another wine that coming from Oregon and you identify as an Oregon made wine, how do you stand out? I mean, I guess I kind of want to like talk a little bit about what everybody was just saying, and I don't, it kind of boggles the mind for me, because I often hear people talking about the possibility of, you know, association with a city specifically and how that might be limiting. And I have yet to see that proven, that there is nothing limiting about adding something more to your brand story, about ways for people to roll you into a community, about ways for people to identify with you and your product. So with, you know, if you're a wine made in Oregon, that is just another opportunity for people to share, another place on an additional shelf, another end cap, another chance for people who are driving through wine country to discover your vineyard if you identify specifically as an Oregon wine. It's a cherry on top. It's a benefit. It's a chance for people to suss you out, to have you be different. I don't think it's, you know, you're not thrown into the great pool of Oregon wines. It's a level up. You know, people understand there's a brand behind what Oregon wines are, the great Jory soil, the, you know, our Pinots, this, that, and the other thing. That's that's a rad thing. You're not lost at sea in the Oregon wines. It's
Yeah.
raising you up. Yeah.
And I think that's like when an organization like Portland Made like really stands out, right? Because you might feel like you're one of many of X or Y, but like if you can have an aggregator who brings people together, who shows businesses and communities that collaboration and support is actually more powerful than competition and trying to like better, you know, the vineyard down the road or whatever. If you can actually like unite and come together and like really showcase like the smaller producers of Oregon wine, and maybe you call out certain regions and certain times of the year. I don't know anything about wine, but you know, is there a way that you can sort of become more of a part of a community rather than always trying to say like, oh shoot, I'm competing against X or Y? You know, that might be a little Pollyanna-ish, but in my mind, that's like the role of one of these maiden brands or a buy local campaign, or, you know, a community, like even like a CSA model, I feel like is really similar. Like it's uniting people and it's connecting businesses to each other and consumers to businesses in a really tangible, sort of easy to follow way.
Absolutely.
I think that's super important. Go ahead, Megan.
Oh, just in Portland, we say, you know, community, not competition, and that's totally right. It's another chance. You know, we just with our Shop Small Saturday, right? And it was magic to see local brands supporting each other, calling out, you know, BIPOC makers in the community that you should check out. And did you know that you can get your holiday cards made right down the street? And it didn't feel limiting. It felt expansive and beautiful and powerful.
Yeah, I love all this. I mean, I totally agree around one, the idea of transparency. So as you're sharing your story, how it's made, where it's made, who you are, what you stand for, all of those pieces are driving, I think, that newer buyer, that it demands that authenticity, that transparency is super important. So as you're telling that story, regardless of if it's about you, it's about how you made it, it's about where you're from, it's about the neighborhood, all those things are driving those clear themes. And then the second point around kind of raising, like, all, rising tide raises all boats idea. How do we start shedding that light on that difference? And I think that's something that's important for us at Mana Up, and of course at many of these other locales, is what is that difference? You know, what do people stand for, and how are we giving them what they're looking for? And having them to start to flip over the package, see who the founder is, what's their story, what are the ingredients, and having that be something that becomes the norm. And it's really amazing, I think, with the organizations here, that many of these companies have that. And many of those kind of bigger legacy companies don't, right? That was this like little black curtain around like what's in this, or who's making it. And I think that's kind of game changing for this industry, that the people are demanding it, they're wanting it. There's a huge shift in what's important. So I'd love to shift gears a little and talk more around some of the resources. I know around kind of, you know, what have been resources important, not only for building some of these organizations, but also that have been important for these businesses, whether that be economic development agencies or government or corporate, you know, who's come to the table and what are those resources? So Megan, we'll chime back into you.
Oh man.
Well,
I was thinking as you were talking, I was like, well, hope she doesn't call me first, because I always start actually with the branding. I'm more the story crafting and the branding, and less, I'm not such a great business person, let's be honest. I have a few Portland Made members in here. I'm sure they could attest to this. You know, for me, with regards to resources, is
who have been great partners? Who have been great partners for Portland Made?
Well, but let me just first say that it's really a lot of it is as an organization to build your own toolkit, to let the makers do their magic, and let those who are making in Portland drive the beast. And so it's providing a strong hashtag and helping them with, you know, beautiful imagery and a lot of things that honestly don't cost money. And so that's what I was thinking when you were talking. But as far as partners, I mean, it's our local development commission, Prosper Portland. They do a lot of work to support local makers and specifically BIPOC makers in the community. A lot of support from our organization in town called Travel Portland, which until recently was promoting people coming to Portland and now is promoting the opportunities for locals to kind of rediscover their own place. But you know, we are a for-profit, not a nonprofit, and so we're not rolling in the grant dollars. We're supported by our members, and our members support us because we're a hub, we're a community, and we're here because we care. And so that's where our resources come from.
Or I guess the flip side is, what are the resources you're providing that have been impactful for your members?
Yeah, so again, you know, a toolkit, things for people to share. We also just simply promotion. You know, when a touring journalist comes to town and wants to kind of to be led towards the makers, to be able to feel out what their vibe is, what their publication is, and who would fit best. We have the finger to the pulse of what's happening here in Portland, Oregon, as it ebbs and flows and changes. And educational opportunities, and really at its core, the opportunity to connect with other makers. A lot of makers in Portland, it's small businesses, it's mom and pop run shops, it's Jacks and Jills of all trades. So a lot of people kind of in focusing at their bench and not having the chance to get out much, even pre-COVID. So providing opportunities for makers to meet other makers and learn from each other so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel. That, you know, here we all are needing to up our game on the internet. Well, do you need to learn code, or could you get a really great referral for a local web developer who can work on the cheap, who understands what you're getting at, and who also cares?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That community piece, you know, the limited things are time and money. So you make mistakes, it's some bad vendor that's screwed other people over and you didn't know. That's, you know, half the battle is how many of those mistakes can you make before it becomes so costly that the business is highly affected. So I couldn't agree more. Katy, I'm sure you have tons of, yes.
Before you go to Katy, I think Meghan had mentioned earlier sort of these pop-ups that they've been doing on empty storefronts. And yes, I think you and Mana Up have been doing not just a store that showcases all the businesses that go through your cohort, but also a ton of sort of gift bags with multiple products. So those ideas for how organizations like yours can also help promote your members. I just mentioned those two, but I think other innovative things that you guys have been doing on the branding side, since Meghan, you mentioned you were on the branding side of things.
Yeah, I totally agree. You know, on Mana Upside, you know, we do have our store. A big part of that is the narrative, telling the story of our entrepreneurs, being able to create different themed gift sets that are really driving really more around this idea of regenerative as opposed to extractive, where by not only just supporting local, it's about supporting a program that is helping to build more local products and more entrepreneurs. So it is that more regenerative idea. So yeah, I love the idea you guys are doing pop-ups. We have a pop-up ourselves, but you know, we do try to help our companies get into spaces. And it seems like there's a lot of vacancy right now, so getting a lot of good deals and things like that. Did you want to share anything else, Meghan, on that?
Oh, I mean, I guess that is, you know, Portland Made. Again, we're small. There's me here as the executive director, and I have an intern. And so, you know, back to saying it's really about the makers and supporting the makers and what they do best, and figuring out what the strong suits are of every brand that's a part of Portland Made. And one of the things that one of my kind of unofficial promises to Portland Made makers is that I'm not here to profit from their sales. I'm here to see the brands and the companies thrive and continue and exist, and to keep making Portland, to keep making Portland beautiful and honest, and the things that we love it to be. So there was a big kind of land grab and scramble recently with COVID for a lot of organizations in town to develop like online marketplaces and such. And then from that, then with the churning of that machine comes the need to take a kind of start siphoning off percentages from people. And it was sitting here this summer and then into the fall with markets going by the wayside. That's a lot of Portland Made makers, their bread and butter comes from these holiday markets, and with the inability to organize those during COVID, was thinking, how do we get brands in front of consumers? And for Portland Made brands, largely our consumers are in Portland, though not exclusively. And so to get the brands in these pop-ups in the vacant storefronts on the streets where real humans walk by and fall in love. I mean, once you see these brands, you can't help but want to learn more and to get your hands on them. So to make use of the resources that we have, with the little that we do have financially, so to do these pop-ups in the shops has been a massive success, and I recommend it for other cities. Take note, Katy and UMA.
All right, thanks, Megan. So I don't want to shift gears too much, but Jalene, love to have you chime in, and Katy, I know we're kind of talking more on COVID and opportunities and challenges that's presented for this topic. But I don't want to also forget our resources talk. So Katy, I'll get back to you on that. But if we want to dive in real quick into COVID, where that's opened up opportunities and challenges, then we'll shift back into resources.
Yeah, and I just, Jalene, if you want to go first, I can pop in, but I think they're really interrelated, the COVID and the resources. So
yeah, totally. Sure.
So actually to piggyback on what Megan was saying, and then kind of in another direction. So COVID has brought about this amazing adaptation of technology. So leveraging technology in this moment has never been more important, right? So pivoting, how did people pivot? There's a lot of move to e-commerce, and to the point to Mana Up just did a kind of like a home shopping network live theater experience, and that creative thought process, whereas maybe a year ago it wouldn't have been so successful, but this year, because of COVID, it was the right time. And then to kind of speak to COVID and how people have had to pivot, and the resources that were available to help people pivot were also quite integral, right? So the Small Business Administration, I think in every community has been, just really top of mind in terms of financial resources at the city level, at the state level, different kinds of grants, of course, made through the CARES Act. And then, local resources through your accelerators. The accelerators seem to be kind of feeders for a lot of the CARES Act money, for as well for, intellectual property, and then bringing large corporations also into the mix. So you found that there's kind of this twofold. There were large companies who were really affected by the pandemic in a negative way. And then there were large companies that were affected by the pandemic in a somewhat positive way. And those companies were looking to give back to the community in some way, shape, or form. So the whole of the tech community was giving away tons of free resources you know, whether it be free 3 months free membership on a platform for your sales cart, for how to learn about Facebook marketing. There were a ton of resources and continue to be to today. And I think, you know, if taking a moment in your own communities to kind of identify what those organizations are that are kind of the amplification of what's going on, and then you get connected with them, you'll always know, you know, where those resources are and how, and then kind of think about how you leverage them.
Great, thanks, Jalene. Katy, why don't you chime in?
Yeah, and I think Jalene and Torie could probably speak to this better than I can, but from what I understand about the maker businesses and manufacturing businesses, and really any business, any small business in particular, is like exactly what Meghan said. Like makers do, and any business person, what they do best is make their thing, is provide their services. And what they're less great at are finding the resources they need to grow and scale. And so if there are economic development agencies or nonprofits or accelerators or entrepreneur centers who can aggregate those resources and make it easier for the businesses to access, that's like where I see is like the benefit of that like ecosystem building role, rather than having like some poor individual like Google searching and like going out of their mind, like clicking all the links and like just giving up. And then, you know, their business takes a hit because of it. Like who can be that hand holder, that navigator, that partner in growing a local business? And to me, that just like Jalene, just like you said, maybe that is like one of the big tech companies who actually put out a how-to guide on how to start your own, you know, your new e-commerce page, or maybe it's a small business development center or your local SBA or SCORE office, or maybe it's even like a lender who is like trying to give away money or give like make a loan to you, but you need more help than just the money, right? Like you as a business owner need to know how to use that money effectively. And so I think if we can sort of orient ourselves and our economic development practitioners, like as businesses, because I know that's mostly who's in the audience are businesses, if there's a way to come together as a community and say, hey, this is what we need. And these are the jobs that we support. Like, even if you're a sole proprietor, right? That is like one good paying job. That is not something to look down on, right? So if we can, and if you can come together and sort of make that argument, to me, that's where like a Made in brand really stands out, as they're that aggregator of resources, and you just save so much time and therefore make the businesses money because they're able to work on their businesses. That was my first point. And then the COVID resources, I mean, we have some that are more geared towards practitioners, so I'm not going to tell you all about those necessarily, but I think looking at entrepreneurship centers, looking even to industries that are adjacent to yours. So like a lot of people who are makers and makers, don't identify as manufacturers. And our argument is like, well, if you just knew about what was available in your community for manufacturers, you might find some resources. So thinking about those industries or verticals or whatever you want to call them, they're just next to yours or maybe 2 steps removed, there might be some sort of nuggets that you could pull out for your own business in terms of resources.
Great, thanks, Katy. Torie, any thoughts around challenges, opportunities with COVID, as well as resources that have been hugely impactful for your business?
Yeah, I think we're lucky in that DC is we're a city of organized overachievers. So there's a lot of like resources available and a lot of people coming together to make things work. I think that we've had sort of we've had two different real kinds of things making COVID a little bit easier for all of us. On one, you know, the Department of Small and Local Business Development has been an incredible financial resource. They've been putting together grant programs for small businesses who've lost, you know, a significant amount of revenue. They have done like just a huge number of different types of funding and support like opportunities, and the official Made in DC program kind of falls underneath that. They have been working to sort of get different DC brands opportunities to get them, you know, like free spaces at local holiday markets. They've been working really hard to make sure that DC makers have the resources that they need from sort of a structural level. But then I'll also say that I actually think the most impactful things that I have seen happen during COVID have been organic collaborations between different DC businesses. So we, in April, right after things shut down, a local shop called Shop Shelter, which is run by a woman named Mallory Shelter, she's a jewelry maker, put together a something that she called DC Shop Small. And it was a small business Saturday in April where she consolidated deals and specials and all sorts of different opportunities from like many of made in DC businesses. And we all put on an event together. We all co-promoted it. We all were posting the same graphics. We were all making this sort of larger event that was done organically. It wasn't by anything that was paid. It wasn't from a larger organization. Nobody was making money doing it. But we had a record sales day for any day in our business that day. And I heard that from many made in DC businesses as well. And then we've continued that that sort of collective to put together a summer sale, to do the actual Small Business Saturday event. So just being able to basically leverage each other's audiences to make this like much bigger megaphone through these collaborations with other local businesses has been the best thing that we could have possibly done financially for ourselves. When everybody is making a lot of noise about the same thing, and when we're all getting together and like pushing the same message out there, we just end up being way louder and way more connected to the community than if it was something that was top down.
Yeah, no, this is awesome. I think some themes that came out just listening around, that whole adoption of technology is just also been super game changing, whether that also be alongside e-commerce or just digital marketing. So how are you succinctly now able to tell your story when you're not necessarily standing next to your booth at the farmer's market or inside that store? So investing in video, imagery, written narrative, that can then be pushed out into different platforms, I think is game changing. And then you think about who that audience becomes. It's no longer just the people that happen to come visit your city. It really at the next level becomes like a national kind of audience. And we learned that quite a bit when we just hosted our, we're an accelerator. So, we help provide mentorship, resources, and access to capital for our companies. So as our companies come into the program, there's a highly curated aspect to it as to what are their bottlenecks or challenges for scaling. And that'll be different for every single company. So when Jalene came through, I'm not going to get into what her challenges were, but they were very specific areas that were totally different than someone else's. So we have a arsenal of mentors that are vetted, that aren't going to like screw someone over or, not be impactful. And I think that's a huge piece. But I think to everyone's point earlier, the biggest beauty was as we just get out of the way. Those collaborations are so powerful. Even seeing some of our companies opening stores or having gift sets for the holidays that have some of the other companies in it. Our rum company actually did a collaboration with 2 other portfolio companies to create a honey chocolate rum. So those are always fun ones. But I think that collaboration piece, as this industry gets stronger, there is a lot of noise, but as they're working together and creating those collabs, it starts to get so much more elevated.
Meli, we have about 10 minutes, but
okay.
I do have a question here about the intersection of social justice movements and the local made movements. So branding, etc. How do you sort of merge these or not touch them at all, or are they entirely different conversations? So I know it's a big question for the last 10 minutes.
It is. And I know we were also had looked at, cultural based themes as opposed to place based, the difference. I know in Hawaii, there's a big difference. Would anyone like to address what you've seen, what you may have done or seen with other companies that have done it successfully or not around what's going on, I guess, politically or other types of areas beyond just place-based?
Oh, heck. I'll do it.
I knew you'd write.
So a couple of things just kind of pop out. I think in the same way that a made in or a culturally based company, both are telling stories and unique stories and want to be heard and want to be authentic. I think social justice movements in the same vein are doing the same thing. They are telling the unique stories through their lens and looking to create some resonance with an audience. And it may or may not be, for the most part, I don't think it's super geographically located, but I do think that having that narrative and everybody has their own kind of space in which they want to share their perception of that movement, right? So everyone's going to have their own little thing they want to talk about. You can go onto social media and everyone has a little space that they live in. Same with companies. There's a little space that you live in and a little story that you, or message that you want to send out. Earlier in the chat, there was a question about, I think there was a question about messaging and how you, how you want to deliver the message, and does it have to be from your perspective? Someone asked me in particular. And so as a business owner or as a maker, I think that you put your perspective into everything that you do. You may not be verbal about it. You may not, speak politically or have a very focused mantra in terms of these different things, where they're, again, place-based, culturally based, or a social justice theme. But it's always there, because that's really what people are trying to connect to. They're trying to connect to who are you and what are you about. How loud you are or how subtle you are is up to you. And then there was another question in there I wanted to just hop on, because this is one of these hard topics. So someone asked about expanding a made in from like Portland to Seattle to maybe like Vancouver. And if you have that knowledge and that context, so if you know the Vancouver, BC experience, by all means, share that. And I would say if you don't know it, so if you in Portland wanted to make a Hawaii scented candle that somehow conveyed Hawaii, my suggestion would be to partner with someone who has that experience. And you are the manufacturer, maybe the intellectual property, and let them be the context, and have a part in creation. I think that is where collaborations work very well, because if you don't have the context, you're just going to be Target, right? You're going to be this dress. No one's really going to know what it's about, and you're going to be big manufacturer. So stay focused and collaborate. By all means, expand your business, please. Expand, but maybe do it through collaboration.
Yeah, I like that. I know a lot of in Hawaii with culture, it can get a little bit tricky. So a lot of people share the story of like the farmers they work with, or the particular place of like the farm or whatever it may be, that can help that. Does anyone have any other thoughts though on the question around, kind of layering in certain political things that may or may not make sense to align with, or just keep it kind of not about that? Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't talk about creating a stronger local ecosystem without naming the systemic racial injustice that our entire country faces, soup to nuts. And without naming it, you ignore people's stories, you ignore people's challenges, and you ignore massive opportunity. And I think it takes, I know people have said this so many times, but I really think it's true that it takes intentionality and it takes reaching into communities through trusted partners. It's almost like, Jalene, it really reminded me of what you just said. Like, you can't just go into community and say like, it's made here and I've been here for 4 days. You know, there's like that inauthenticity that people can feel. And where that sort of applies to our work is we did a survey of about 600 businesses across 6 cities, including Portland, about 2.5 years ago. And we were trying to get a really representative sample. And, you know, we were intentional, we tried really hard, and we just could not get very many Black and Latinx makers to respond. And we got some feedback from our partners, particularly in a couple cities, that said, well, that's because you're calling them makers. And like, that's a very white woman word. And so like thinking about, again, what's adjacent, what's like that? What are other communities? How do they identify themselves? Like, don't try to pre-label, right? And so like, is it a craftsperson? Is it a designer? Is it an artisan, an artist? Like, just because someone calls themselves an artist doesn't mean they don't want to have 10 employees and scale their business and provide jobs to their community, right? So it's about finding those trusted partners. It's about understanding the local context. And it's really about time and investment and not rushing through and trying to just get those survey results, but instead, you know, or try to implement a program. It's like, okay, well, understanding what the community is, who they are, what they need, what they're already doing, how they're already supporting themselves, and then finding a way that you fit in to support that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree
Katy
more.
for governor.
Yeah, I think when you also think about social justice, you think about also these micro brands and small business and underrepresented people. And the stories that haven't been told and the people that didn't have access to capital to build business, right? It had always been this like well-worn wheel or pathway that were the certain type of person that was going to create that kind of wealth and success. And so I think as a lot of these brands that many times are very underrepresented. I know for our company, 60% of our founders are female and 45% of our founders are Native Hawaiian. Even just like those sheer numbers are helping to elevate people who traditionally weren't part of that system. And those stories are being told and heard. So I think all of this is super aligned as we kind of weave this. I know we only have 2 minutes left and I think they're kind of strict on the time. So I want to give all of our panelists an opportunity for like a 30-second advice for anyone looking to start, pivot, get involved with more made in businesses. So Torie, we'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I really liked what I think Meghan said, that it was about community rather than competition. Go out and meet people in your community. Like entrepreneurs, we are a friendly bunch. Like if you're starting a business or if you're pivoting a business or you want to take a new direction, go talk to people who do businesses like you do. They want to share with you. They want to see you succeed. And the more that you're connected to everyone around you, the more that we raise all boats. So.
Awesome. Thank you. Meghan, how about you?
I would say for all of the entrepreneurs who are in this call to share who you are and to not hide behind the royal we, to really add you are the authenticity to your brand. So share your face, share your story, and round out your brand story with yourself.
Thank you. Katy.
I would just say that like through Torie's collaboration suggestions and Meghan's community suggestions, like band together and tell your service providers what you need as businesses and demand it until they provide it, and find someone like Meli and her group who can, you know, maybe think a little bit more specifically about where your place or your specific industry, who can help you build some sort of infrastructure for yourselves.
Thanks, Katy. Jalene.
So last year I participated in this very event in person. And what I took away from it, which I hope you all take away from it, is some confidence, some inspiration and some confidence to go out, make some things happen, and then to tag upon Torie. It's networking is so important. Your community can be local, but your community can also be global. So one thing, like a little tip, if you had scrolled through this presentation, which I did several times, and go and look at everyone's LinkedIn, look at their names, hit them up as a friend. This is a community right here. And obviously everyone is interested in entrepreneurship and elevating themselves. So everyone would be open and receptive to conversations. So aloha and have a great day.
All right. Well, thanks to all of our panelists. I know we're a little bit over time, Diego, so we will end here. So thank you all for joining.
Meli, we are actually heading to a break.
Oh, okay.
So we do have about 15 minutes before the fireside chat. In that case, I'm going to leave this room open for people who want to stay and have a conversation. But again, we are on break. So if you need to run out and grab a cup of coffee before we come back to the main room for the fireside chat with our founder, please do so. And if any of the panelists are willing and able to stay for another 10 minutes, we'll continue the conversation here.
All right, great. Thank you, Diego.
So Meli, tell us a little bit about this rum with chocolate honey collaboration. One of the things that I think I found super interesting this year in some of these networking sessions was to see businesses, not just locally, but across the country in the program say, hey, yeah, I'm a wine business. I'm a wine shop in Boston. I can connect with a jam business in San Diego and a cheese shop in Portland, and we can put a basket together for a Friday night in and something like that. Or so these collaborations I think have been amazing. So always love hearing it. I saw the shout out to Torie's cards from the flower shop. So always amazing things.
Well, I think that's what's so neat about, these collaborations or gift sets. You can slice and dice, and that could be important to someone. So, we have a female founders gift set, or Native Hawaiian founders, or, food or healthy snacks. There's lots of different ways that you can partner up and that will really resonate with someone, where it really does make sense. It's not about buying one thing from like 10 different online stores. Creating some of these gift sets has been really powerful for our initiative as well. I know I thought we were kind of having to get cut short. So if there are any particular subjects or an area we want to dive into more, I want to open it up to our panel to launch into something else if wanted.
Jalene touched very well on this idea of still maintaining community in a time when we're not able to come together. Thoughts, and I know, Torie, I liked what you mentioned about this, all the businesses coming together to do sales over the summer. So any ideas, thoughts?
Yeah, it's funny. In normal years, I would have so much social contact with all of these different makers. We would, get together for happy hours, for hangouts, for meetups. We'd, have so much more of this, and now so much of it has been pushed online. One thing I'll say, we use Instagram as our main channel because we're such a visual company, and I've found just being a lot more interactive with people, connecting with people, checking in with people, commenting on posts, sharing things with different people has been really meaningful this year. And it's really, like I said, just created sort of a megaphone effect to be able to introduce people to new makers, introduce people to makers that like maybe they from communities they maybe wouldn't have interacted with otherwise. Just being able to use your social connections in a way that that makes things, just gives access to an audience to people who maybe wouldn't have that. We have a really fun thing that people are doing in DC right now, where if you can't share links in your Instagram stories unless you have over 10,000 followers. So organizations and companies that do have over 10,000 followers are now doing a thing where they'll say, hey, 20 people a day, reach out to us. We'll share your product and we'll actually put a link to it in our Instagram stories so we can get you guys, out here and get more people directly to your website. Just small things where you're collaborating in these like little itty bitty ways. But if so many people do this, it makes this wave that makes a huge difference. And I've watched it make a huge difference in sales numbers, over the past couple weeks as we've headed into the holiday season. So it's really a good time. If you have that opportunity to amplify others, go and do it.
There was kind of an area around supply chain and local sourcing. I know we didn't get to touch on that. Any comments on, I know that's an area for us. We have very challenge around like manufacturing. We're trying to actually bring in an HPP machine that helps to extend shelf life for value-add food products. So that's kind of game changing for some of our entrepreneurs to be able to see it all the way as they create products and envision products they can utilize with local ag. Is there anything kind of coming up for any of you folks around local sourcing, supply chain, manufacturing that we can bring up?
Yeah, I'll put my 2 cents in. And oh, Jalene, go ahead. You first.
No, go ahead, Katy.
Okay. Thank you. I was just going to say that one thing that COVID has really laid bare, right, is the sort of disaggregation and disconnection of manufacturing, not only from each other, but manufacturers from each other, but down to the consumers. And I think there are ways to sort of build that back up through institutions that already exist. So thinking about, rather than building from scratch, thinking like, okay, there's a manufacturing extension partnership, an MEP, which serves small to medium, what I would consider very large, but not their definition of large is not the same as mine, but they serve like the 20-person plus organizations. And how do you partner them with folks like Meghan on the ground who are working with the 1 to 5-person shops and help build supply chain connections there? And then how could those MEP centers who already collaborate on a national level do even more work to connect to each other and connect regions to each other? And of course, that would take a federal mandate and a federal budget. But how could you use existing institutions to make those supply chains and what people are more and more calling value chains, so including the labor and the storytelling, the ideas together as well. And I'm really sorry, y'all, I have to drop off, but it was such a pleasure.
Thank
And
you,
it was really
Katy.
nice to be on the panel. Thanks, Diego. Thanks, Meli, for everything.
Before
Bye,
we
y'all.
actually close off, I do want to remind everybody that you can save the chats. So if you go to where you were typing, you'll see the little 3 dots. You can click on that and actually save this chat to your computer. So all those links that you got in here, you can keep. All right, Meli, we'll go again with parting thoughts as
All right, great. Well, I have just a couple minutes left, but if there are any last words or topics that didn't get brought up, I definitely feel that this is a really exciting time to be in this space, regardless of COVID adding even more opportunity. People's viewpoints are changing as to their buying habits and what's important to them. I can't implore that more. Even from, this is more on a product standpoint, but from the CPG, $10 billion has been invested in, I think, 4,000 products in the last 10 years. 7 billion of that has actually been in the last few years. So it's ramping up even from an investment standpoint, venture capital. So I know we didn't get to go into that too much around access to capital, not only from a VC standpoint, but even from loans and grants and a lot of access that was never the case before, which is quite game changing. When we think about some of those bottlenecks that require capital in order to get through, how are we doing that? So if anyone has any thoughts on that, Jalene, I know have you done any of the grant programs or any of the access to capital?
So speaking of grants, actually, yes. So I'm participating in a program to have more manufacturing of PPE on island. So I was actually asked to apply just because I'm in the textile world. I have never done fashion. So my first garment is going to be a reusable PPE hospital gown. But because we do have equipment and some intellectual property that would help us to easily pivot, the goal is really to be able to have more supply chain security, as well as be able to enhance small business, through this program. So that's been a recent occurrence. As far as access to capital, predominantly it's been traditional, and I've been self-funded and then traditional debt. I'm really interested in some of the new ways in which people have access to capital. So for example, there are new programs that will allow for e-commerce supply chains, where they're giving you net 60, net 90 days. And so really you can float your buys. And then there's more angel investment, there's more purpose-driven investment that is out there. And I do imagine that we're going to see more of that. There actually is, I saw a topic in the ICIC agenda. Diego, what day and time is that?
Thursday is, most of the day on Thursday is about capital. We'll have the kind of gentle Shark Tank, and then the panels around different types of capital asks with alternative lenders. So people who sat through the panels have seen quite a bit of the traditional lenders. In these panels, you'll see some more alternative solutions to equity and to smaller asks, for example, and things like that. So thanks, Jalene, for pointing that out.
Yeah. Do you have people representing Community Block Grant?
I believe they may be on Thursday. I will have to double check that. Yes.
Yeah, that's something that everybody should be looking into. Because I do think a lot of people in this room probably qualify.
Yeah. Well, we'll let people take a little break before you guys launch into the 11 o'clock.
Well, thank you again. Thank you all for joining us and for staying on a little longer. And we'll see you all in the main room for Dr. Porter's fireside chat, and then the speed networking after that. Meli, thank you. Jalene, thank you. Meghan, thank you. And Torie as well. Thank you so much for being with us today.